This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, 3 historic institutions face the future this week. For 2, the former Charity Hospital building and the University of New Orleans, the signs were encouraging. For the other, the Fairgrounds, the track is muddy. Elsewhere, though, 2 Orleans Parish jail escapees remain missing. At least according to one council member, some of the jail's keys were easily available. A month from this week, qualifying for the October election will be on the way. A new poll measured the popularity of Mayor Cantrell as well as the political effect of key issues. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO TV Channel 26. And James Finn, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we go over to Stephanie first because, it's almost 20 years now since Katrina hit us. And for those 20 years, the old Charity Hospital building has just been empty. But there have been moves certainly to renovate it, to get life going in it again, and some news on that this week a little bit.
Yeah, there were some important developments that happened within the last week. Look, this project still has a long way to go. As you mentioned, it's been vacant for almost 20 years now. And about 7 years ago, LSU, which through the state of Louisiana owns the building, awarded a contract to renovate it to a little-known group of developers that beat out Press-Kabakov's firm, HRI, which has tremendous experience in this area. And this group basically proceeded to blow through $80 million and 7 years later has nothing to show for it. Now, Tulane University had agreed early on to be the anchor tenant of the project and to lease almost half of the square footage for medical offices, lab space, really some exciting stuff. Tulane sees this then, as they still do now, as sort of the catalyst for the redevelopment of downtown and the anchor of their very rapidly growing downtown campus. Well, when the project stalled out, and it's really been on the ropes now for a couple of years, Tulane came in and basically has been negotiating with the original development team, with some developers for hire, the domain company that was brought in a couple of years ago to try to help rescue it as well. And Tulane has agreed to take a larger stake in the project to basically be an equity partner in it with a majority share, slightly over 50%, and to take a bigger footprint of the building, like 60% of the building. And they're still planning to build it out with labs and research space and whatnot. The domain companies, which did that very successful South Market District neighborhood near the Superdome a few years back, is trying to develop the other portion of the building into apartments, some of which is affordable housing. But for a project of this size, a 1 million square foot building, a high rise that's almost a century years old, it's almost a century old, and has been, sitting there empty for so long, it takes a lot of financing from public, private, and all sorts of sources. Tulane said over a year ago that they would need some money from the city and the state. Last Friday night late, there was an announcement from Tulane that they had settled the Wisner lawsuit with the city council, and that bottom line, the result of that settlement would free up $20 million that would be the city's contribution towards the project. You don't want me to explain what the Wisner Trust lawsuit is about. I don't understand that.
It's
Ben
already
Myers would be here, right?
It's a lot of money that was given to the city a long time ago.
Right.
And they've been fighting on how to spend it ever
Exactly.
since. Yeah.
So Tulane said, we'll walk away from our claim to the money. In return, the city said, we'll put up money for big charity. Now, this gave Tulane sort of a leg up, or the leverage that I think it needed to go to the state and to try to get a state contribution from the legislature before the session ended. However, that didn't happen before the session ended. I think the project just isn't quite far enough along, but the city announcement on Friday night last week did, I think, give a lot of comfort to people at the state level that the city's committed to it, that Tulane remains committed to it, and I think before all is said and done, the state is going to find money somewhere, maybe it's in the Louisiana Economic Development budget or somewhere else, to put up, or even funnel it to LSU, which is, remember, still technically the owner, or in some form or fashion to put up money. If that all comes together, and we get the, the other piece from domain companies to come together, and they, whoever's going to pay off the debt that the original development team has, and I don't know how that works out. That's, I think, a huge part of this. Then maybe this thing closes in terms of the legal documents being executed by the end of the year, early next year.
So the $80 million that was spent, we're not quite sure what was done.
No, nothing.
Do we know if the building has at least been cleaned out?
I think some of it has been cleaned out. There was some remediation work done. There's been some more remediation work done. There are a lot of liens and lawsuits still out there that I reported on a couple of years ago. And every once in a while I'll check the docket just for fun, and I've seen that some of the liens have been cleared and some of them haven't. Or
People don't
canceled.
realize it's really a big building.
It's very
There's a lot of
Yes, it
property
is.
in there.
It's very, very big, and it's very, very hard. I mean, this was always such a super ambitious project to begin with, which is why it's sort of just mind-boggling that a firm like HRI didn't originally get the contract for it. Kabakov knew how complicated it would be, and he told the state at the time, we're going to need public money to make this happen. And they were like, oh, well, the other team doesn't, so the other team gets it. Well, and here we are 7 years later. But I mean, people who knew understood back then that this was not going to be an easy lift, and it hasn't been.
But it's a lift that can ultimately be made. That's
Well,
the belief.
That's what they say.
Okay.
We would like to hope, wouldn't
Yeah.
we? Because it really will. It really will
transformative.
be significant for that entire corridor, for this biomedical district that we've been talking about for the duration of my career? I don't know, 30 years, something like that. But Tulane is investing downtown. Tulane is renovating those buildings. I mean, that's the future of the growth of their university, and this is a key part of it, and would be a win for everybody if we can make it happen.
Okay, all righty. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. All right, LeBron, let's jump on over to you because another facility, another historic place, has a place in the city's history is the Fairgrounds, New Orleans Fairgrounds.
Yeah.
And we've been hearing that maybe the present owner is going to pull out.
Yeah, well, that was the word this week, but this all goes back, I would imagine, a couple of years ago. And back in March of this year, or March of last year, I should say, the state Supreme Court rules that one of the gaming facilities that they're doing, one of the means of gaming that they're doing, which is called HHR, Historic Horse Racing, they ruled that that was actually, in fact, a form of slot machine. And because it was a form of slot machine, the problem is that the truck stop owners were beginning to lose out on a significant amount of revenue. And they said that this was unfair to them. Their slot machines can pay out a maximum of $10,000. The HHR stuff pays up to $100,000. If I'm a bettor, that's the person I'm going after,
Go
right?
for the money.
It's very unfair to them. They filed suit. State Supreme Court rules pretty much in favor of the truck stop owners. And what the state Supreme Court said is that, hey, this is illegal. And in order for you to operate this, you have to have the voters have to approve this in every parish that this, that this thing happens in, and all these off-track betting sites and everything else. Okay. This week, Churchill Downs, what they were hoping was to get the legislators in this legislative session to sort of come up with a subsidy or subsidies that would replace the revenue that they would lose because they can't do the HHR or this hasn't gone to the voters or whatever. A lot of the legislators are saying, hey, or some of the pushback came in the form of, you've had record profits in our state, you had record revenue and record profits last year, a profitable company, why are we underwriting this company? No, we don't want to provide these. and the CDI folks Churchill Downs Incorporated, who owns the fairgrounds. We're going to pick up our marbles and leave. They notify the State Gaming Commission that, hey, we're going to surrender our gaming license. That brought a flurry of activity. Certainly that would, and some folks assumed that they would be selling the fairgrounds. They never said this, by the way. And potential buyers are starting to be mentioned. Mrs. Benson, maybe. They released a statement earlier this week saying, hey, we've got a great relationship with Churchill. She is a horse owner. She owns a farm in Kentucky, and she also owns horse races, has had horses in the Triple Crown races and all that. She and Mr. Benson were big horse fans. But the Saints folks released their statement this week saying that, hey, while we're interested and we want to see horse racing in the state, we're concentrating on the Saints and the Pelicans right now, which is kind of a non-statement, if you will. Save it all to say that last night, or within the last 24 hours, both the state legislature and the city of New Orleans, the council that is, sort of passed legislation to force whatever's going to happen on that site to be at least anchored by horse racing. Doing that on the council side by way of zoning stuff. The state saying that, hey, yeah, horse racing has to be a part of this. In other words, Churchill can't take that property and just make it one big casino, if you will, right? So that's the latest on that. Today, the talk is a little bit, in my opinion, or at least a bit more optimistic. The statement we got from Churchill earlier was that we confirmed Governor Landry's direct involvement now, and we're engaged in active discussions with the Racing Commission and the horsemen in hopes of reaching a resolution. So it looks a bit more optimistic. We reached out to the folks at Jazz Fest because, of course, that is the home of the Jazz and Heritage Festival. They're a bit mum at this point, but I think it's premature for Jazz Fest to sort of be able to weigh into this. It's kind of not their fight. Right. There will be a Jazz Fest the last weekend of April and the first weekend of May, and it will be at the Fairgrounds. Right. However, whoever owns the place.
So right now it just seems a little bit more hopeful that there indeed will be a racing season this year at the Fairgrounds.
That is what we get from the flurry of statements and all that.
And my colleague Tony McCauley wrote a story a little while ago that I edited, and we were, that's what he is reporting. Okay. Sources have told him that they're at least committed to racing for the fall 25, spring 26 season. So I don't think we need to worry about that. If it wasn't a high stakes game of chicken all along.
It truly is a high stakes game of chicken. And the fun part about this whole thing is that who can see the fairground season not happening? I mean, I don't see that being in the cards, especially after a profitable year and a profitable season. I just don't see it happening.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see it happening in the fall. Fingers crossed. All right, LeBron, thanks.
I don't see them pulling out happening is what I'm saying.
Okay, good. Well, that is good.
Sure.
James, over to you. Poll came out. Poll that takes a look at the mayor's race and also the sheriff's race, but also on how these different officials are doing in terms of the eyes of the community.
Absolutely, and sort of the top line takeaway from the poll is that Mayor Cantrell's approval rating, which has been sort of steadily trending downwards in her second term, has reached what pollsters call a new low when you look at the major polls that have been conducted over the last few years, the public polls, because of course political folks do sort of internal polls all the time, but of the polls that are sort of publicly released, this appears to be the lowest approval rating of her career as mayor. It's certainly in her second term. It's at 27%. The public official with the highest approval rating is Police Chief Ann Kirkpatrick, who has a 53% approval rating, up about 6 points from last year. So her sort of perception in the public has risen in the past year or so.
Ironically, she was appointed by Cantrell.
That's correct. Yes. And her marks have gone up even with sort of major public safety disasters such as the terror attack, and now you see her department involved in the search for the folks who escaped from the local jail.
What about the DA? The DA's ratings?
He also performed very well. Yeah. He is District Attorney Jason Williams. I believe his approval rating is about 51%. So him and Chief Kirkpatrick, the two public officials with marks above 50%. And I spoke to Ron Fauché, the analyst who performed the poll. earlier this week, and he noted that it's not really a coincidence that crime has gone down, and the two public officials whose work is sort of like most focused on crime have the highest approval ratings. That's not the case for Sheriff Susan Hudson, who also deals with crime, but of course in recent days has been grappling with the fallout of the escape of 10 people from the jail she runs. The poll was conducted in late May and the first couple of days of June, so sort of right in the thick of the backlash that she's faced for that escape.
So has it declined from the previous polling for Susan Hudson?
It is down. It's down over 10 points from last year. And when I spoke to Ron Fauché, he said, there's no way of really knowing because the poll asked very straightforward questions. It didn't get into sort of the details here, but his speculation was that almost all of that drop was a result of her handling of the jailbreak.
And then the feelings about the Sewage and Water Board and its performance.
The Sewage and Water Board ranked the lowest of any entity or public official polled in this survey. Its approval rating was about 14%, which is down from last year. And sort of reflects people's frustrations with billing problems, service problems, flooding, all of the things we know well in New Orleans.
Yeah, you hold your breath with the heavy rain like we had this morning.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but this poll also took a look at the upcoming mayor's race, the fall mayor's race in the city of New Orleans. So what's that looking like? So
the poll shows that Council Vice President Helena Moreno has a formidable lead. She is near 50%. Which analysts say should really come as kind of a jolt for the other folks in the race, or should maybe prompt them to really think about how they're going to cut into that lead and to start doing it soon because qualifying is only a month away. An interesting thing about the poll is that it showed that even as the mayor's approval rating was at a historic low, the approval rating of the council was near 50%. It was at 47%, which is just 1 percentage point down from last year. And I asked folks what to make of that. And sort of the response was, you have two city council members, Councilmember Moreno and Councilmember Oliver Thomas, running for mayor. You have people who are broadly dissatisfied with the services that the city government's offering, but their performance on the council may not connect them to the way people feel about the city, which is generally, it hasn't been managed or run well. The council has a high approval rating. They're running for mayor, and as long as they can sort of channel a change message, a message that shows they're not part of like the government bureaucracy that's responsible for the way things have been running, whoever does that the most successfully will likely emerge as a front runner and ultimately win the race.
I think there were some issues in which Cantrell inadvertently made the council look good, like with her travels, that the way that the council has acted on that and spoken out. The other thing about it used to be that the mayor automatically selected a police chief, and the council said, well, no more of this. We're going to have a process. And I think that prompted it to go through more of a process, which came to Kirkpatrick. If it had not been for the council, it could be that ultimately she wouldn't have selected Kirkpatrick. And so a couple of things that made her look good, I think part of it was because of the council's diligence.
Yeah, I guess the one sort of caveat to that is the interesting nugget in the Jeffrey Vappy indictment last summer, which showed that the mayor actually chose Kirkpatrick over interim police chief Michelle Woodfork, who's now running for sheriff. And her reason for doing so, according to the allegations in the indictment filed by the federal prosecutors, where that interim chief Woodfork had stood with the findings of an internal investigation into Officer Vappy.
And
I kind of put Woodfork on the map too for running for sheriff, and so ultimately may have felt there.
Absolutely. I mean, her public profile certainly stems at least partly from that episode. Yeah.
And then, as far as the sheriff's race is concerned, in terms of polling, what did that look like?
Former interim chief Woodfork is polling a little over 30%, well above current Sheriff Hudson. Sheriff Hudson's poll number in that race, so the number of people who said they would vote for her, is even lower than her approval rating. The number of people who said they would vote for her is 13%. Her approval rating is 18%. And so there are even fewer people who say they approve of her job performance. I'm sorry, there are fewer people who say they would vote for her in this race than say they approve of her current job performance, but both are pretty low.
All right, thanks a lot, James. E, over to you. UNO, LSU, are they together?
Yeah.
Again?
Well, they're coming together. I think this is an important story. Originally UNO when it opened, it was in 1958. It was part of the LSU system, LSU UNO, then gradually over the years, there was sort of a reaction against it. People said, well, look, LSU gets all the attention that UNO needs more attention. And so there was this movement to separate it and to put it as one of the universities in the University of Louisiana system, which has like Southeastern and Southwestern and Nichols and McNeese. So it became a part of that. There was a lot of support for that. It felt like it gave it more of its integrity. As a student, I kind of thought that was a good idea, okay? I mean, more emphasis on New Orleans. I think what we learned, though, is that the University of Louisiana system doesn't have the presence and the power that the LSU system has. And I think this is what people realized, what the problem that LSU was having, that it needed to be latched on to something big. And two people realized that were Cameron Henry, who's the president of the Senate, and Philip Duvalier, who's the Speaker of the House. And so they started this movement in February. I think the first public talking about it, about let's see if we can transfer UNO to LSU. Well, this sounds like a big issue that would, have a lot of fighting going back and forth. But it's amazing how things fell together fairly quickly. Here you have the two most powerful legislators supporting it. The LSU system said, okay, well, we're supported. The University of Louisiana system, who thought would offer the most resistance, made glowing references, said, we think this is a good idea. The Board of Regents, which governs higher education, also said, hey, this is a good idea. And so all of a sudden, everything was falling into place. So over the last few weeks, it had to go before the legislature. And the legislature, the Senate approved it 36-0, and the House during the week approved it 96-1. And so in the whole legislature, there was one vote against it. So that sounds like pretty solid support. So it's going to happen. Now, what this is not a sale, it's a transfer. And so UNO is being transferred to the LSU system. There's a lot of things that have to happen now. That when it was passed, I want to mention another politician, a guy named Jimmy Harris, who's the state senator. And I know James has done a piece, kind of a very positive feature on it, but he really worked behind the scenes and made it happen. And I know from LeBron that Jamie Harris went to St. Aug.
Yes,
so
sir.
ultimately, we can say that it was a purple night that helped save LSU.
That helped save UNO. All right.
So purple night. But anyway, he had to do a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiating, including this week. So a lot of things that need to be done. And in August, Kathy Harris, who's the president of UNO, has to send a formal letter to the Board of Regents saying we want to make this move. Of course, everybody knows it's coming. And the legislature says that after that, a commission or a study committee made up of legislators and people, interested parties, get together. And by April of next year, they need to answer all the questions. And the questions are, what's the name of it? What do you do with the privateer? Is it silver and blue? I mean, all those kind of questions and the whole structure of the, and more serious questions. And so by April of next year. So it's in process. It's going to happen. And in doing this, that the state allocated last week, I thought it was like $20 million up front. And then since then, they did like another $8 million for infrastructure improvements. Ultimately, they said there's going to be cost of about $81 million. But they think that this is the association with LSU will be the boost that UNO needs.
And we certainly hope that it is, because UNO, University of New Orleans, whatever its name is, the university has been really, really important to this community and so many members of this community. So, okay, we'll see where it goes.
About how important it is. I think more important than anybody ever imagined, yes. So it needed to be saved.
Yeah, it did. Okay, thanks, E. All right, over to you, James, to wrap this up kind of quickly, because, the jangling of keys was making some news this week, keys to the jail.
Yes, that's right. A couple days ago, Council President J.P. Morrell posted a Instagram video where, like you said, he's sort of jangling a ring of keys around. He says these are the keys to the Orleans Justice Center, the pretrial jail that, as we were talking about a second ago, 10 inmates escaped from last month. 2 are still on the run. He says that a whistleblower came forward. Attorney General Liz Murrell's office and other law enforcement agencies have been interviewing all kinds of people in their investigation of the jailbreak. One of these people who came forward was a whistleblower, as Council President Morrell says, who handed over these keys. Former employee who says that they had these keys and the sheriff failed to collect them when the person was fired from their job at the jail. The keys have now been handed over to Attorney General Murrell's office. So sort of whether they were instrumental in any security breaches or what doors they opened or what exactly they are, we hope will come to light through the investigation. The sheriff, for her part, responded to that video by saying that basically that it was false and that the keys were not keys to the jail and didn't open any doors at the facility. We will know sort of the truth there ostensibly when the investigation ends.
About those keys, about that set of keys also? I mean, that's where those keys actually went to the Attorney General's office, and they're going to find out what those keys were for?
That's correct. That's what Attorney General Murrell's office tells us. We got a statement from her office basically saying we've taken the keys, we're looking at them, and what exactly they do and how they work at the jail is part of her investigation.
We're seeing something new from Councilman Morell, as twice in the last month he's gone to Instagram to make a statement about an issue. He's very good at doing that. He's very colorful. Something about a Carnival crew and something about this. So he has his own media now.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, it's sort of like the way of doing politics now, where sort of traditional media outlets aren't quite as important maybe, and politicians can go right to their voters by getting on social media, getting on Instagram. You see that with the mayor's race as well. There are all these influencers who are kind of picking sides, picking candidates.
To say, the influencers, and the incident of the jail escape, I don't think I've ever seen an incident in our city be covered so broadly by the influencers. And the interesting thing about that is I think I first found out about it by one of the influencers who posts like 10 people have gotten out of the jail. I'm like, wow. That's not
But for that to
only
work,
for that to be the truth. And I'm like, how did this guy know?
for that to work, the mainstream media has to show it, though.
That's
So
correct.
these guys, they do their Instagrams, but where to go without being put on TV?
Well, we will be talking more about that in the weeks to come, I'm sure, because we've run out of time for this conversation, other than around the table. Over to you, E.
Well, James had mentioned that the qualifying would be in a month. It's next July 9 through 11. So a month from today, it's going to be all over as far as the qualifying. Coincidentally, the election is October 11th. And so 3 months after the qualifying ends will be election day.
Okay, Steph.
New Orleans and Company released a new study showing that visitor numbers to the city last year, 2024, approached the highest number ever, more than 19 million, back to almost pre-COVID levels.
Okay, LeBron.
You know what? Our nonprofits in this city work best when they're like a really good time and they do great work. Well, this week is the culmination of one of them, and it's now Feed the New Orleans Wine and Food Experience. It's been going on all week, and it's a grand tasting and all that other stuff. And they also support culinary education. Did a story on them earlier this week. It's always a great time, but party with a purpose.
All righty, and James?
The local U.S. Attorney's Office, as federal prosecutors all over the country are doing, has gotten really focused on immigration. They've filed a number of misdemeanor charges against immigrants for failing to register with the government locally, which is a new strategy that the Trump administration is using. It's only been used here in Louisiana and a couple other districts nationally, and it's now being challenged in the courts. So sort of the fate of that part of the president's immigration agenda might play out here in Louisiana.
All righty. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.